So, hello everyone. I'm James with Chicago Market. As I said, tonight is the latest in a series of online workshops that we've been organizing for our community. And heads up that the next one will be July 29th, where we're going to do chocolate truffle making. So you can order a kit from Catherine Ann Confections if you'd like to. We also have the ingredients that you can bring yourself for that one. So that's July 29th. And then we're going to have a kickboxing workout class. That's going to be August 11th. So you can find those on our webpage. If anyone has ideas on other workshops you'd like to see or ideas for presenters, you can put that in the chat box tonight or send us an email. And also wanted to mention that if you enjoy this workshop and would like to support Chicago Market in producing them and pursuing our goal of opening a grocery store, I want to let you know that Chicago Market now has a donation feature. So if you're interested in supporting our co-op in that way, I'll put the link to the donation page in the chat box here in a second. So for our agenda tonight, we're going to start with a brief introduction and update on Chicago Market. And that's going to be by Anthony Todd, one of our board members. And he also happens to be a cocktail enthusiast. So we'll share some of his thoughts about cocktails, ingredients, and so forth. And then we'll turn it over to Ryan, who from BitterX, who's our featured presenter, and he's going to take us through a couple of cocktail demonstrations. And so please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, and we'll also have time for Q&A at the end, and then end the recording around the top of the hour. And if folks want to stay on longer and chat with Ryan, we can unmute our microphones at that point. So let me turn it over to Anthony.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. As James said, I'm Anthony Todd. I'm one of the board members of Chicago Market. We have been working pretty hard all spring. For those of you who pay attention to our communications, which you're not required to, you know that there's been a lot of work going on, which has not actually been delayed by COVID, despite the fact that things are a little bit in flux right now. So I'll give you a brief update on where we're sitting right now in terms of Chicago Market. You know, as many of you know, there's been some discussion about whether or not our current location at the Gerber Building is going to be a great fit for us. I have optimistic news for those people who haven't heard this, which is that one of the things we've been doing for the last, about 8 weeks is in an attempt to really make a good decision about that space. We've enlisted the help of some new consultants. And normally the words new consultants kind of fill me with dread because that's generally not a good thing. These are some of the most intensely awesome co-op experts in the country. These are all people we've worked with in the past, but now we've brought them together like this all-star team, and it was really amazingly inspiring to see. They walked in the space 2 weeks ago for the first time, and literally were redesigning the entire store from the ground up in the first 5 minutes, coming up with all sorts of incredibly creative ideas about traffic flow and patterns and labor and build out and signage and so much amazing stuff that you guys are going to be seeing more and more of that coming out in emails and blog posts over the next couple weeks. But here's hoping they can come up with a really great project that will make the building a little bit easier to use. Beyond that, the market continues doing things virtually. Normally, as I'm sure many of you would know, we would be doing pop-up markets, we would be doing farmers market appearances, all the stuff that Chicago Market does. Right now, obviously, we have to do that stuff virtually. But thanks to James and other volunteers, we put on some really amazing virtual programming, and also put on, for those people who are interested more in the wonky side of the market, some more information sessions and chances to talk to board members. Anyone can show up at a board meeting. They're all now on Zoom, which is super convenient. In fact, I'm kind of thinking one of the silver linings or happy accidents of this age of social distancing is that all those things are much more accessible. So if you're an owner and you want to come, we've had really robust owner questions. It's been really good, actually. Attendance has been much higher than it was when board meetings were live, frankly. So it's actually kind of a great thing for the organization. We've gotten some great volunteers out of it. We've gotten some great ideas. So that's basically what's going on with Chicago Market right now. We're trying to figure out our feasibility study for the Gerber Building site, getting amazing ideas from our consultants. Uh, Also, I want to throw in, before I talk about Ryan and cocktails, I want to throw in a plug for our next workshop, which James mentioned, which is with Catherine Duncan. I've been working with Catherine. I'm a food writer, which we'll talk about in a second, but I've been working with Catherine since she had no shop, since she was running out of like a rundown kitchen in the middle of nowhere in Uptown. And now she has one of the most beautiful shops in Chicago. She's built it up into an empire. She sells at Whole Foods around the country, but she is still like the most amazing, wonderful person ever. And I've taken 3 or 4 different make your own chocolate classes with her, and they're all universally amazing. So pre-order the kits, come to the classes, tell your friends, and that is a pitch from personal experience, not a pitch as a board member of Chicago Market. So be sure to do that. Now, in terms of cocktails, as I mentioned, I am a food writer. I make my living as a lawyer, but I also have a weekly column in Chicago Magazine as a food writer, and I did before, when there were restaurants to go to, and will again someday. But before I joined Chicago Magazine, I was actually a spirits writer primarily, doing cocktails and bars and that sort of thing. And, you know, as someone who, I'm not going to lie, I like going out to bars. I like drinking fancy cocktails. It's been a real loss to not be able to do that, not just because of the drinking, but because of the creativity. You know, I'm less of a go to the Wrigleyville bars. I'm less of a go to the brew pub, though my boyfriend's a go to the brew pub person. And I'm much more a go out to the craft cocktail bars and talk to the bartenders and learn cool things and watch them mix new products together. And I've been able to, obviously, for a couple months, and that's been really disappointing. But what it has done is it's really upped my home mixology game, because it's had to up my home mixology game because there's nowhere else to go. It's not like I can walk across the street to my Great Corner Bar and have a cocktail. I've had to learn to do it all at home. So my stack of cocktail books has gone from this big to this big. And one of the things that all of those books have in common is recommending amazing, locally made, interesting brands of bitters, because that's the easiest way to take like a pretty simple cocktail and turn it into a really interesting, complicated, elevated cocktail. So that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have Ryan around, because there's so many great brands of bitters on the market. If you know anything about cocktails and you've been to any liquor store, you've seen like cases and cases and cases of them, especially over the last few years, but not a lot of them made in Chicago. We have a lot of great spirits, we have a lot of great distilleries, but not a lot of great sort of accessories and ingredients companies. And if you look at the list of products that Ryan has, the variety is pretty insane. So I'm really excited for you guys to up your home mixology game. I'm really excited for you guys to up your mixing. I'm the one on the board, by the way, who is like the loudest proponent of having a really robust local spirits section at Chicago Market. So I have a place in my heart for products like this. And hoping to be carrying products like this soon. Until then, by the way, and I know this is in some of the descriptions you saw, but in case you didn't read all of them, you can get Ryan's stuff online, but also one of the places that's been greatest during the COVID crisis has been River Valley Farmers Table, which has converted a lot of space to grocery, carrying a lot of amazing stuff from local farmers if you haven't been able to go to the farmers market or your farmers market isn't open. And they also carry Ryan's products. So if you want to get a fix of some great local stuff and these products as well, you know, shout out to River Valley Farmers Table. So I want to turn it over to Ryan. I'm really excited to hear about how he makes his products, how he turns them into great cocktails, and his tips for all of you making delicious stuff at home.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, James. I appreciate being invited to do this presentation. And yeah, I guess without further ado, I'll start talking a little bit about bitters, a little bit about the cocktails that I chose, and then we'll get right to it. So I've been making bitters for about 10 or 12 years, but 4 or 5 commercially or professionally. It's called Bitter X because I started the company with my ex, Stephanie Andrews, and it was her name. She thought it was a cute name, and so did I, so we kind of went with it. But one thing that we had in common for sure is that we loved creating new flavor profiles, new recipes, not just limited to cocktails, but everything that we did together was really, you know, an adventure. And but the bitters is how we met. The bitters is kind of how things started. She's since moved to Europe, and I kind of kept it going. But the original 5 flavors were the 5 that we came up with. And then subsequently we added 3 more. So there's a classic aromatic, a citrus, a coffee, a spicy celery, and a root beer were the originals. The last thing we did together actually was the charred cedar and cloves, part of the newer collection. And then there's a hot pepper and sour cherry, and I'm going to use a few of those tonight in the cocktails. A lot of people ask me, what are bitters? Bitters are made with alcohol. It's actually high proof. You need to do a high proof extraction process to get all the flavors. I liken it to an extract, like a vanilla extract or an almond extract, with the difference being that these are more robust and complex flavor profiles. So, but they can be used the same way. I mean, you use them in cocktails, but you also can use them in cooking and baking as well. So the cocktails that we chose tonight, when James approached me about what we should be doing, I knew that the audience would be varied in their skills and comfort. So what I did was I made it so these are really simple, basic cocktails that we kind of like tweaked, and they're using fresh ingredients by design, mostly because we were talking about doing summer cocktails, and because of the variety that you can do with them. So the people who want to be a little more adventurous, like we kind of left it that they can use their own ingredients that they come up with, but I'm going to stick with the one that is written, but the process is going to be the same. The first cocktail is based off of a margarita, a classic cocktail with a few twists to it, but pretty basic, pretty simple. And then the second cocktail is basically a vodka lemonade, but we incorporated a shrub. So why don't I start by doing the first cocktail, which is called the Black Widow, only because I did a search online and found something called the Black Widow, and I don't even know if this is really called the Black Widow. But regardless, it is a muddled cocktail. So when we do muddle something, we're usually using fresh ingredients. The things that you muddle when you're actually doing the muddling process is fruit, sugar, bitters. Those are kind of the main things. In this case, we're going to add an herb. We're going to add the fresh basil to that, which I need to grab real quick. So, and I think everybody might know this trick where you make a little greenhouse in your fridge and it keeps your fresh ingredients last longer. So I'm going to start right away in my pint glass. If you're using a cobbler shaker like this one, that's great. If you're using just a regular Boston shaker like I am, I'm going to use a pint glass, and then this is going to eventually connect that way. For those of you who chose something besides blackberry and basil, I'll try and kind of give you guidance on amounts, but my philosophy is just do everything to taste, trial and error. So if you feel like if you did blueberries and sage, let's say, and my blackberries are much bigger than your blueberries probably, we'll just kind of estimate, and then when you get, when you try the drink, you'll just kind of keep notes of what you did. This is kind of how I do it. And then, the next time you make your adjustments until it's something that you're proud of and want to serve to your friends. So when I start, I'm going to grab my fresh fruit. And I'm going to do about, these are pretty big. I think I'll do 5 of these guys. So you can see, I mean, it takes up a lot of space, but when you mash it down, it's going to come to like somewhere between 1 and 2 ounces of juice. I'm going to grab some basil here. I think I'm just going to add 2 leaves. They're large leaves, but I'm going to add them in there. So I drop those in. And then in the recipe that we sent you, the bitters that we're using are citrus. So this is the citrus bitters, I Will Survive, if you have it. And I think it was like 4 or 5 or so. I mean, you can, again, do everything to taste. I kind of gave you guidelines. And then I'm going to do a sour cherry bitters as well. This is called You Little Tart. The sour cherry bitters is the one in my arsenal that you actually, if a recipe calls for 3 to 4 dashes, I recommend you double it. When you taste it on its own, it definitely tastes like sour cherry. But once you get it into a drink, you really got to load it in there to get it to that plateau for the full effect. So this one, I think we said like 8 or 9. And when I say a dash, it's not just turn it over and let it drip out. It's an actual like motion where you kind of slam it down so that about 5 to 7 droplets come out. And I didn't put this in the recipe, but I feel like doing it. I also have a hot pepper bitters called Hot and Bothered, and I'm going to spice mine up just a hair. So I added about 3 or 4 dashes of that. And then we have to add our sugar. And in this case, we chose agave nectar, and I believe it was ½ ounce. And again, adjust as you see fit, but a classic margarita uses agave, or the original recipe at the very least.
Hey Ryan, can you go just review real quick what you've done so far? I'm catching up.
Yeah, absolutely. So far we're just kind of doing our muddle build. So I have my berries in here. So if you have, I did blackberries, and I said that it's going to be about 1 to 2 ounces of juice. So you kind of have to eyeball it. So if you have blueberries, you're probably going to add double that. So you're probably going to want to add like 8 to 9 normal sized blueberries. I added a couple of leaves of basil. So if you're doing sage, a little bit of sage goes a long way, but thyme, you're going to want to remove the leaves of thyme, and you're going to use a lot more thyme leaves. And then I added a ½ ounce of our agave nectar, and then I added our bitters. I haven't started muddling yet. I was about to say that at this point, I'm going to use a muddler that I have, but you do not need to. You can just use a spoon and just really like jam it in there. What you want to do when you muddle is you want to get the fruit mashed up into the sugar and bitters to kind of create this like new flavor of juice. And you don't want to mash your leaves, your fresh herbs as much, only because the more you mash them, the more that it'll become bitter, the more you kind of destroy that leaf. So what I like to do is just kind of like keep an eye on where I'm muddling, and maybe hit the leaf a few times just to release the oils without damaging it terribly. Eventually we're going to strain it out, and it's not even going to be in the drink. But we do want to get the essence of that sweet basil or whatever herb you're using. So I'm going to move this out of your way so you can just kind of see. I don't know how well you can see this, but so I'm kind of putting my muddler in, and I'm just doing a slow twist and making sure that the berries are completely broken up. And I've only hit it a few times, and you can already see it's like basically turned to juice. But it's got some big pulpy chunks in there. I'm going to hit my basil leaves twice, and then just try and go back to the juices. And I feel like that's it. You don't want to really overdo it. I need to rinse this off. Actually, don't need it again. So anyway, what I'm left with is a pulpy juice, and the sugar and the bitters are all blended in with it, with my basil kind of on top. But the rest of that sugar, rest of that agave that didn't pour out. All right, now I'm going to complete the rest of the drink before I start shaking it. So I think we went with an ounce of lime juice. This is not the ounce. And when I do a margarita, or when I do a sour, I mean, a margarita is basically a sour or a gimlet. They're all kind of the same principle. I do a 2-to-1 juice, or I should say citrus juice to sugar. That's my preference. People, people make skinny margaritas, or they kind of make it up the way that they want to do it themselves. You can use, you don't have to use agave. If you want to use simple syrup, you could use simple syrup. I have a sugar substitute I think it's called ethitrol, or I don't know, I used it when I was doing the full 30 diet at one point. But if you want to go sugar-free or sugar substitute, you can do that as well. Coconut sugar works. The point is it's a sweetener. And I like to do 2-to-1, as I mentioned, citrus to the sweetener. But if you want to keep that lower and just use the juice of the berries, that works. It's totally up to you. So if you want to make a skinny Black Widow or a skinny margarita, what we're doing right now, you don't have to add any sugar. Just keep in mind that sweetness is not going to blend with the bitters, with the juices and the herbs. And if you decide to add tequila or whatever your booze of choice is, you're just, you're missing out on a little bit of it. the classic sweetness component. Fine, it's just gonna be a little different. So I just grabbed a white tequila, and some of you aren't using any alcohol at all, and you just made a mocktail. What you did here would be enough, or maybe you just want to double all these ingredients, and then you'll have a non-alcoholic beverage that's still going to be just as delicious. All right, and just to make sure, 2 ounces. All right. So I'm going to add my 2 ounces of tequila. And just to do a quick dummy check, make sure I have everything. Tequila, basil, yep, that's all of it. All right. So for those of you that don't have shakers, you can stir this. If you just want to take your vessel and grab a spoon and just kind of stir it up, that's fine. It's kind of a better idea to shake because you're going to get everything to really mix together well, and it creates a frothiness, and the ice will melt a little bit more. Adding, adding that water is actually an important component. But yeah, if you don't have those ingredients, or if you don't have those tools, that's fine. You don't have to do it. It's just, it's better to use the tools for the job. All right, I'm gonna add a cube of ice here. I like to fill it up to the top. I'm going to grab my Boston shaker. Now, before I do this, the straining comes after this. I lost my Hawthorne strainer, so I don't even get to show you what one looks like. I don't know if you clicked on the links to see what we offer to you, but it's a good point to make right now that I'm actually going to just strain using just a household strainer, which is totally fine, but it's not the right tool for the job, but it still will get it done. Okay, so we've chilled it, we've diluted it, and I'm going to get my glass ready. I might do this into here first, into this larger vessel, so it's a little easier on me. And if I had my Hawthorne strainer, I would have demonstrated for you that you can use a little tea strainer as like a secondary strain, and that will kind of eliminate all your ice particles and just make it a really smooth drink. If it's not that important to you, that's totally cool. I like to strain into an empty glass. I don't put the ice in first, I put the ice last. So that way you can gauge how much ice is needed and you don't overflow. That's a really beautiful color, huh? And then I just kind of add my ice on top. And then I'm gonna garnish. Just, I'm using my iPhone, I'm sorry, but I saw some questions pop up. Did someone see what somebody was asking? Oops.
All questions have been answered.
Okay. So I'm just kind of throwing a lime on top. I'm going to garnish with some of the fruit that we muddled with because I think that's fun and pretty. And I'm also going to add a little bit of basil because why not make it beautiful and delicious? All right. So there we have our Black Widow. I don't know how well you can see that, but super pretty. And now for the taste test. Nothing beats fresh fruit, fresh herbs in a cocktail. It's really good.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah.
It's delicious.
Good. I'm glad it worked out.
Ryan, we have a question. Do you have any recommendations for where people can get a cute bar accessory set?
So I think I mentioned, or it was in the email, there's another store that does carry my bitters, but happens to be a really great store here in Chicago called Chicago Bar Shop on Armitage. I think it's Armitage, somewhere between Halsted. It's near the Red Line, so just west of Halsted. They have every product you'll need. They have an online store. I think right now, because of the pandemic, they're doing by appointment only, but all you have to do, if they're there, all you have to do is they're just trying to limit people coming in. So you just have to email them or text, or I don't know how they're doing it, call them, and then you can just swing on in. And then, so not only do they have every tool, but I'm pretty sure they have cute and clever different toolkits. And they have everything there that you'll ever need, including my bitters.
Cool. So let's take a moment. Did anybody use any alternative ingredients that you want to share?
Yeah, I do want to
Or
know
did
what
everyone
people are
pretty
doing.
much follow the instructions?
We use blueberries instead of blackberries, and definitely can see how the blackberry would be like a nice like tang versus the sweetness of the blueberry, but it's still delicious.
Right now, did you, sorry, I was going to say, did you stick with basil or did you do a fresh herb?
We just did basil and a little bit of thyme.
Ooh, yeah, I love blueberry and thyme. I think that's a
Yeah.
great combo, and I bet the basil in there is really nice to give it a nice sweet texture.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll have
There's
to
a
think
great, oh, go ahead.
we'll have to think of a name for the blueberry time special.
Miss Violet Beauregard. Anything blueberry is always Miss Violet Beauregard. I was going to say, there's a really great book that I have in the other room. I'm not going to grab it, but it's called The Flavor Bible. And the Flavor Bible is really neat because you can basically look up any ingredient for food and for drinks, doesn't matter. But you can just look, if you looked up basil, it just lists all the complementary foods and fruits and herbs to that item. So it's pretty cool to like kind of flip through that. I mean, I just love it as a coffee table book. I just kind of have it out in my in the other room. But yeah, that's I mean, you can obviously use the internet and search and see what complements what, and there's always going to be, you know, different resources. But the Flavor Bible is a nice, concise, big, heavy, comprehensive book. We keep drinking. Any other questions, or should I move on to the shrub next?
Let's do the shrub.
Okay. So I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what a shrub even is. And I wrote a little blurb that I just kind of put together for a class I taught on shrubs years ago. But basically a shrub is a drinking vinegar. So originally farmers would go out into the fields all day and they'd kind of put together a mixture of vinegar and a sweetener, and frequently it was ginger to be refreshing, but they just kind of like tied it to a little flask or a canteen and used it in as a substitute or in addition to water, and it just kind of kept them cool all day. And I don't know if that concept developed, you know, where it really originated. I did research somewhere that shrub is an Arabic word for to drink, and that's very similar to shrub, but there's not a lot of detail in regards to what a shrub is. But all you really need to know is that it's a vinegar-based syrup that's used to flavor a drink. So in this case, we decided to do a honey mint shrub. This is based off a drink that we do at the Long Room where I work. It's called the Mint Condition, and it was named by someone who's who's online on the Zoom right now. And I think everyone always comments that it's like the perfect name for a drink. But what it uses is apple cider vinegar and something called champagne vinegar. Champagne vinegar is just like a light, airy, sort of citrusy vinegar. I think it's made with Pinot Noir grapes, but it's citrusy and fresh and bright to kind of counter the tart sweetness of the apple cider vinegar. When I do shrubs, I like to use them in the same principle as you would a simple syrup, meaning I add a sweetener and then I bring it to a boil, and I add my ingredients and I bring it to a boil real quick and then let it steep. You don't have to do that. There's a lot of cold shrubs that are really great, and if you just take a mason jar and you take your blueberries or your blackberries or whatever it is that you're putting in your shrub with your apple cider vinegar and even a little bit of sweetener, and you can even mash it up with a spoon, tighten the lid, give it a shake, and then just stick it in the fridge and leave it for like 3 or 4 days. Excuse me. That works as well. My philosophy has always been to melt, any of the sugar granules. You really want to get those to become part of the solution, the liquid. So I always bring it to a quick boil and then let it cool and let it steep. Generally, it's going to take anywhere between 1 and 3, or overnight to 3 nights for a shrub that I've created. But the longer you leave it, the stronger it gets in the flavors. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to build it, and then I've got one in the fridge that we're going to strain that I made the other day. So the ingredients are, again, in that PDF that you received, and I've kind of pre-measured everything to make it quick because you don't really need to watch me measure things out, but I'm still going to show you. I'm just going to do it in a small saucepan. This, by the way, this recipe makes about 1 quart, a little less than 1 quart. So you can always half everything if you don't want to make such a big amount, but it's your call. Or you can double it and make a lot. It tends to last a couple weeks. So that was a cup of water, and then I'm going to add 2 cups of apple cider vinegar. A 1/2 cup of champagne vinegar. This is the brand that I've been using. I kind of like it. It looks like it's from Target, but it's not. 1/2 cup of this. That's the last of that. And then I did 1 cup of sugar. That's pretty sweet, a 1-to-1 ratio with water. But the reason why I do that is because in the drink build itself, I do not add any sugar or simple syrup. This is the simple syrup built into it. So really, it's a 1 part sugar, 3.5 part liquid. So it's not terribly, it's sweet, but it's not terribly sweet. And I think, a little bit of salt before I add what do I do with the salt? I always add salt to everything. If I learned anything in working in restaurants, it's add a pinch of salt or add butter, not in this case, but the pinch of salt helps bring out the flavor. And the honey. And it was 2 teaspoons. You can up this as well, but I feel like this is a good amount just to give it a hint of honey. I'll actually load it in there. And then finally, the mint. So when I use fresh herbs in my shrubs, I like to bring half of it to a boil. And then when that cools, I take the other half of that fresh herb and then I add it into my vessel and leave it overnight. What happens when you bring things to a boil is that it's really going to tear up this these leaves. I mean, it's really going to do a number on them. And it starts to bitter a little bit, which is fine, but I like having that like fresh essence as well. So if you just put half of it in and leave the other half for when it's cool, to let it sit. You'll see after 2 days, the mint will look identical to the one that you brought to a boil. It really, I mean, it'll work itself in. But I think it's a smart move to keep some fresh stuff that you don't add any heat to. So this is it. Normally I would bring this and bring it to a boil. I'm not going to bother with that actually, because in the interest of time, I did this for you ahead of time. So I brought it to a boil. I made sure that all the granules were, into the solvent. And then I let it cool. I added it to this container, and then I threw that extra half of the fresh mint in there. So when we strain, I have a big fancy chinois that I use. It's like you would use this in restaurants. You don't need to have this. This thing will do the trick, but I spoil myself. All right, so a neat trick at this point, there's 2 things you can do to really get that mint to release all the extra liquid. You can take a small ladle and just kind of mash it down so that it lets all the like strongest, the mintiest parts out. Another thing that you can do is, if I was at the restaurant, I would put on gloves, but if it's for personal use, you can actually take that mint in your hand and like wring it out and let it fall through the mesh strainer. And that way you get all that liquid out into your shrub. But that's it. This is now a liquid that you can use in your drink. I'm going to put some in a squeeze bottle so that it's easy for me to use when I'm making drinks. Okay. So that's it. We made a mint shrub for our cocktail. Does anybody want me to pause, and are there any questions? I saw some stuff pop up, I think, but.
Oh, I was just saying I accidentally put 2 cups of sugar in my shrub, so I think it's going to be super sweet.
Well, let us know how it is.
So I do have one question, Ryan.
Yeah.
So when we were prepping for this, I think one thing we talked about is that if folks do want to make a mocktail without alcohol, they can use club soda to sort of top out the drink and replace the booze.
Absolutely. That first drink that we made, you could either double the recipe without the liquor, or you can add club soda to it. Or I recommend, because I'm not a spokesperson for it, but I am addicted to them, is Topo Chico. Topo Chico is it's an amazing topper to drinks and makes a really nice fizz, and it stays fizzy for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you know that. But using it in cocktails is definitely the way to go, or in your mocktails. Yeah, good point.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So now we're just making a vodka lemonade, basically. So we're going to do equal part. Well, I'm making mine with booze. I'm just going to use a little bit of vodka. So I'm going to do equal parts, 1.5 ounces of the shrub, 1.5 ounces of the vodka, a 1/2 ounce of fresh squeezed lemon juice, which I did ahead of time. By the way, another plug for a product that I'm not a spokesman for. I spent way too much money on this at Sur La Table, but man, this is hands down the best juice squeezer. I think it was like $30 for this thing. Worth every penny. It's got this mechanism that kind of like really presses this down and squeezes the heck out of your citrus half. I absolutely love this thing. And you get a lot of juice out of it. So anyway, said I'd mention that. And then we're going to add the citrus bitters as well. So I'm going to, this time I'm going to use the cobbler shaker that I have. A cobbler shaker has its own lid and has a strainer right on the top. I did the blackberry, the Black Widow last night practicing with this, and it really gummed up in here. It was hard to like get it all out. It took a while because of all that pulp and the basil leaves kind of covering up these holes. But it works. You just shake it a little bit, pour. Shake it a little bit, pour. It's worth it. I wouldn't do that in a restaurant, but when you're not pressed for time, it is. This is probably a more valuable thing to pick up for your home than doing a Boston shaker that you have to like jam into a glass. It's or one that has two metal parts is also good, but you know, the cobblers might be the way to go. And I don't know if you'd consider this cute, but I bet that they have this at Chicago Bar Shop. All right, so 1.5. I'm going to start with the shrub. And again, if you're not using alcohol, you don't have to use any right now. You can just put more shrub, like James mentioned, and then add a little bit of extra club soda later to taste. Definitely still use citrus though. I recommend, in this case, lemon, but lime would work just as well, or orange. I believe it was a 1/2 ounce of this guy. There we go. Fresh squeezed lemon. And then citrus bitters, 4 to 5 dashes. I don't do 4 to 5 of anything. When it comes to bitters, I load it in there. And yeah, we don't put the carbonated beverage in before you shake. That's always a topper, because if you were to shake it, put the carbonated beverage in there, the pressure's going to build up and spray you all over. The one bad part about cobblers is they're really hard to get off when you shake them. And that's why I don't use them. Oh wait, I don't need to take it off because it has its own strainer in it, so who cares? We'll worry about that later. Or sad. I used a taller, more slender glass just because I thought it looked good. You can do whatever you want, as long as you save room in there for some ice, and then your club soda topper. And I think we said 2 ounces. That's just everything that I put in there is just a guideline or an estimate. Definitely do it to taste. You want to give that a little bit of a stir. And I think I said garnish with a lemon wheel. Not a bad idea. So I just kind of cut a wheel, put a slit in it, and then I saved some mint. I like to tuck the mint into the wheel. And this glass is way too big, but that's okay. There's our mint condition. And of course, I do a taste test. I think it's pretty good. I think that was a good amount. You can always add more club soda, as I said, if you're going to get that real tanginess, not just from the citrus, but from the vinegars as well. Some of you won't be used to that. It's an acquired taste. Don't be afraid to, crinkle up your nose when you first try it, but give it a chance, and you'll really. I think you'll start to like it over time. I think that's everything. Oh, the other thing I was gonna say was you don't have to use vodka here. You could have used gin. You could have used tequila. in any of these situations, if you're a bourbon drinker, you can use bourbon as well. I mean, bourbon and lemon and mint can go well together. So there's nothing wrong with using a whiskey as well here.
All right. Well, thanks, Ryan. We've got about 10 minutes if folks have questions. Dana wanted to know how my mint condition came out. It's delicious.
Not too sweet?
No, I can definitely, the first couple sips, the vinegar really comes through.
Sure. And as that ice begins to melt, it's going to relax a little bit.
Cool. So if folks have questions, please feel free to type those into the chat. My question, Ryan, is it seems like, making cocktails it's a lot like cooking, where the secret to success is being prepared and kind of like thinking through the sequence of what you need and having it all ready. So what advice do you have, for us looking to be, I guess, better cocktail makers for our guests and, folks?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it like because it's akin to cooking. I mean, think back to when you just started learning how to cook and you were sort of like, following recipes and adding exact amounts. And then as you become a stronger cook and more confident, you're kind of adding dashes and pinches like your grandma did, like you're not really like measuring as much anymore. I still am a fan of measuring the basics, especially the alcohol part of it. But as far as like other ingredients, I mean, I can eyeball most things when making cocktails, and still make it pretty decent. I mean, I worked at a bar where we free poured everything, and it's fine. When you're sticking to the classics, I highly recommend starting with sticking to the original amounts and then tweaking it from there. So again, it's trial and error, as you said, being prepared. But if you have a fridge full of ingredients and you look at them, the more you start with these sort of cocktails, especially the first one, and then you can like start to tweak it and use different fruits and herbs, you'll be able to look in your fridge and be like, oh, I can make a cocktail out of that. I can use that in a drink. That would go well with this. And the other thing is, if you don't like the whole idea of muddling, or if you have time ahead of time, let's say you bought 2 of these blackberries like I did, you can make it into a syrup or a shrub ahead of time too, and that's totally fine. I still recommend that you do a little bit of muddling when you use fruit. So if you were to make a blackberry shrub or a blackberry simple syrup, what I like to do is take the fruit, I throw it into the saucepan, sprinkle it with a little bit of sugar, and then put it on a low heat so it starts to sweat a little bit. And once that like steamy sweat of the fruit starts to happen, then take your spoon or your muddler and just kind of like break that fruit up so the juice comes out. And that sugar will help kind of like make it into a syrup. And then you add your water and the rest of your sugar or honey or whatever ingredients you have. And then you're taking the fruits that might go bad in your refrigerator or out in your fruit bowl, and turning them into something that's going to last a little bit longer, and you could add to drinks, just by, filling up a squeeze bottle if you have them, or just, putting it into a little deli container like this. It's super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. We're getting some good questions in, so let me just shoot at you rapid fire. What's a good substitute for champagne vinegar? Is there one?
Gosh, I guess a white wine vinegar that's basically what it is. I was going to say white vinegar, but I don't like using white vinegar in my shrubs. I actually gag at the smell of vinegar. So it's weird that I like shrubs, but I never use white vinegar when I want to drink. So yeah, I would say white wine vinegar.
Cool. Any favorite brands of bourbon, gin, vodka for cocktails? Any you want to mention?
Besides the obvious local Koval, which, I'm a fan of, I especially like their gin. Union Horse Distilling is a really great bourbon that I like. They're out of, I can't remember if it's St. Louis or Kansas City, but they're available here in Chicago. They're really great. CH is one of the only distilleries that I know of that makes their own, that distills their own vodka. A lot of places will buy a grain spirit like Everclear, but like a non-name brand Everclear, and then just add water and call it vodka. But they actually make it down in Pilsen. So CH, especially for their vodka, they also own Malort and make it there if anybody likes Malort. I think, yeah, I mean, those are a lot of my favorites. Oh, another gin is called Hayman's. Hayman's is an Old Tom gin. And if you ever look up a recipe for a Martinez, if you don't use Hayman's, it's not going to be very good. Along with Dolan, which I have, I think right over here. No, I don't have any right now. Oh yeah, I do. Dolan is the vermouth that I like. It's cheap and it's really good. I mean, I know a lot of people like to pay for that Carpano Antica, which is great. Dolan is awesome and inexpensive.
Cool, thanks. Well, we're getting some love for Kansas City, but no love for Malort in the chat. Yeah. Do you have a favorite Negroni recipe?
I do. I'm going to jump back to the Dolan again because that's the sweet vermouth that I use. There's a gin called Ford's Gin, and then just Campari brand Campari, equal parts. That's how I do it. So 1 or 1.5, whatever it is, whatever you use of one, you use the same of all three, and then stirred, strained. Add ice if you want, but that's a really good recipe.
Sounds good. In terms of using bitters in baking, do you have a rule of thumb for how much to use on the bitters? Yeah.
So all the bitters have this little governor on them, the little dasher. It comes out, and then it just looks like the top of a vanilla extract bottle. So you don't have to actually dash. You can use a teaspoon. I do whatever a recipe calls for the almond or vanilla extract. I will add the. I generally, if it's a vanilla extract, I'll add one of my aromatics like coffee, this root beer, or I have a classic aromatic. But if it calls for a teaspoon, if it calls for 1/8 of a teaspoon, then I'll use 1/8 of a teaspoon in that recipe. So it's kind of like a substitute. But I also agree with just adding on that same amount. So if you don't want to lose that strong vanilla flavor, you can take the 1/8 teaspoon of the vanilla extract and then just add an additional 1/8 teaspoon of the bitters. And somebody just said double the bitters on everything. I like that guy.
How about if all we have is frozen fruit for cocktail making? Any advice there?
I mean, just thaw it out and do the same thing. Yeah, you can totally do that. But yeah, I would let it thaw first because when it's frozen, obviously you're not going to be able to get the juices out of it, and you don't want to necessarily. I don't really know. You probably don't want to go from frozen into a steaming pot. So I would say thaw it out so that it's squishy, and that way when you press down on it, the juices will come out a lot easier, and still do the sugar trick on top of it. As far as using them directly into the cocktail, same thing. Thaw it out and then muddle it.
Cool. Someone says they purchased the book Liquid Intelligence.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations on other cocktail reads? And then I'll add to that. Do you have a favorite movie involving cocktails?
There's a book called PDT. It's the name of a bar in New York that stands for Please Don't Tell. It kind of came up in the beginning of the resurgence of cocktails, or the classic cocktails in the late 90s, early aughts. I can't think of the guy's name right now. I've gone to see him speak. It's a speakeasy in the back of a hot dog stand in New York. And that's a great book. And then there's another place out of New York called Death and Company. And they have a beautiful book filled with amazing cocktails. So those two books are really great. As far as movies go, I don't want to say cocktail, but I honestly can't even think of one. No, I don't. Sorry, I don't.
No worries. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and just one last question on the mint condition. Would
Yeah.
you consider that a savory drink? Or like, what's the classification for that?
I mean, ish. I would say it's an herbal drink or slightly a savory drink. I would say it has savory elements. I don't know if it's necessarily a savory drink. I have a spicy celery bitters that if you added that to it, it would definitely, and you only need to add like 4 or 5 dashes and it'll completely change the drink to a savory drink. But I think because mint and basil, for mine, I chose kind of sweeter herbs. Yes, they're savory. Yes, they're herbal, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like a super savory drink. But if you were using, let's say, sage or celery or cucumber, things like that, that's more of the savory drink that I personally would call it that. So yeah, it has savory elements for sure, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a totally savory drink. Jim Meehan, that's who it is. That's Please Don't Tell PDT. Thank you, Roy.
Cool.
Or
well,
Kelly, that might have been Kelly.
Yeah, thank you so much,
was
Ryan. This was a lot of fun. I hope everyone had fun. So we're going to wrap up the formal part of the event. If folks want to stay on and hang out and chat some more, we'll do that. But again, thank you, Ryan from BitterX. You can find his bitters various places in Chicago. You can order them direct. And just a reminder, I hope to see you on our future Chicago Market workshops. And again, if you would like to support us, I put the link into our donation page. It definitely helps our mission. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. And thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.